Some secrets are meant to protect the people we love. Others become weapons in the hands of those who don't deserve our protection. I learned the difference between the two on a Tuesday morning when my daughter called to uninvite me from her own wedding, the same wedding I had been secretly funding for 8 months. My name is Ruby Coleman, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop giving everything away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it all began, I was sitting in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, watching the rain streak down the windows while sipping coffee from the chipped mug my daughter Sophia had made me in her high school ceramics class. The imperfections in the glaze had always reminded me of our relationship, beautiful despite its flaws, or maybe because of them. I had no idea that within hours, everything I thought I knew about that relationship would crumble like poorly fired clay. At 62, I had spent the better part of 4 decades believing that love meant sacrifice. Not the healthy kind of sacrifice that comes with raising a child, but the soul-depleting kind that slowly erases pieces of yourself until you're not sure who you are anymore without someone else to serve. I had been Ruby the mother for so long that I had forgotten Ruby the woman existed at all. The phone call came at 9:15 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I was watching the local news, waiting for the weather report to see if the rain would clear up for my afternoon walk through Laurelhurst Park. The meteorologist was explaining something about atmospheric pressure when Sophia's name appeared on my phone screen, and my heart did that little skip it always did when she called. Even at 28, she was still my baby, and hearing from her always felt like a small gift. "Mom," her voice came through the speaker, but something was different. There was a tension in her tone that I had learned to recognize over the years. The same careful control she used when she was about to deliver news she knew I wouldn't want to hear. "I need to talk to you about something." I muted the television and gave her my full attention the way I always had. "Of course, sweetheart, what's going on?" There was a pause, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped, before she spoke again. "It's about the wedding." My heart lifted slightly. Sophia's wedding to Marcus was still 3 months away, scheduled for a beautiful Saturday in June at the Abernethy Center, a historic venue overlooking the Willamette River. I had been looking forward to it for months, not just as her mother, but as someone who had been quietly orchestrating many of the details from behind the scenes. What Sophia didn't know was that I had been paying for most of the wedding myself, working with the vendors directly, and asking them to send the bills to me instead of to her and Marcus. It had started innocently enough. When Sophia first got engaged, she and Marcus had sat down with me to discuss their budget. They were both teachers, passionate about their work, but not exactly rolling in money. The wedding they wanted, nothing extravagant, just elegant and meaningful, was going to stretch their finances to the breaking point. I watched my daughter's face fall as she calculated costs, watched her start talking about cutting corners and scaling back her dreams, and something inside me couldn't bear it. So I made some calls. I spoke to the caterer, the florist, the photographer, and the venue coordinator. And I worked out payment arrangements that would allow Sophia to have the wedding she wanted without the financial stress. I told myself it was a gift, a way to ensure her special day would be perfect. I told myself she would understand when I eventually revealed what I had done. I told myself a lot of things that, looking back, were probably more about my need to feel needed than about her actual needs. "What about the wedding, honey?" I asked, settling back into my chair and preparing to discuss whatever last-minute detail was causing her stress. "Marcus and I have been talking," she began, and again that careful tone. "And we've decided we want to keep the ceremony really small. Just immediate family." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "That sounds lovely, more intimate." "Right," she said, and I could hear her take a breath. "So we're gonna need to make some changes to the guest list." Something cold began to settle in my stomach, but I pushed it away. Sophia was probably just nervous about the planning, maybe feeling overwhelmed by all the details. I had been there myself when I married her father all those years ago. "What kind of changes?" "Well," she said, and the word hung in the air like a stone about to drop. "Marcus's family is pretty small, just his parents and his sister. And on my side, we're thinking, just Dad." The words didn't register immediately. I heard them, but my brain seemed to refuse to process their meaning. Just Dad? I repeated slowly. Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is, Sophia said, and now I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. Marcus and I have talked about this a lot, and we just think it would be better this way. You know how you get at big events, how you like to take charge of things. We want our wedding day to be relaxed, and we're worried that if you're there, you'll try to manage everything. How I get at big events. The phrase hit me like a slap. I thought about all the birthday parties I had organized for her, all the school events I had volunteered for, all the times I had stepped in to make sure everything ran smoothly because I wanted her life to be easier. When had caring become controlling? When had being helpful become being overbearing? Sophia, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, I'm your mother. This is your wedding. I know, she said quickly, and you'll still be part of it. We're planning a reception afterward, just a casual thing at Marcus's parents' house. You can come to that. But the ceremony itself, we just want to keep it really simple. I stared out at the rain, watching it pool in the corners of my windowsill, and tried to understand what was happening. My daughter was uninviting me from her wedding ceremony. Not because of a venue size issue, not because of some family drama, but because she thought I would be too much trouble to have there. Have I done something wrong? I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. No, Mom, she said, but there was a weariness in her tone that suggested this conversation had been rehearsed. You haven't done anything wrong. This isn't about you doing something wrong. It's just about what Marcus and I want for our day, what Marcus and I want. Not what we want, not what they wanted together, but what Marcus and I want. As if I was somehow separate from that equation, an outsider looking in on my own daughter's life. I see, I said, though I didn't see it all. I felt like I was drowning, like the ground had shifted beneath my feet and I was falling through space. And you've already decided this? We have, she said firmly. I'm sorry if it hurts your feelings, but this is our decision. Our decision. There it was again, that careful separation between us and them, between my daughter and me. When had I become the them in her life instead of part of the us? Okay, I said, because what else was there to say? I could have fought it, could have demanded an explanation, could have pointed out that I had been planning to surprise her with the fact that I had paid for most of the wedding myself. But something in her tone told me that this wasn't a discussion, this was a notification. Thanks for understanding, Mom, she said, and she sounded relieved, as if she had been preparing for a much bigger fight. I'll call you later this week about the reception details, okay? After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the rain and staring at the muted television screen. The meteorologist had been replaced by a commercial for car insurance, and I watched it.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Without really seeing it, my mind trying to process what had just happened. My daughter had uninvited me from her wedding. She had decided that my presence would be more of a burden than a blessing, that I was someone who needed to be managed, rather than someone who should be celebrated. And the worst part was that she had made this decision with such casual certainty, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to exclude your mother from one of the most important days of your life. I thought about all the times I had put Sophia first. When her father and I divorced when she was 12, I had turned down a job opportunity in Seattle because I didn't want to disrupt her schooling. When she was in college and struggling with her double major, I had taken on extra freelance work to help pay for her tutoring. When she and Marcus were looking for their first apartment together, I had co-signed the lease because their credit wasn't quite good enough on its own. I had always told myself that this was what good mothers did. They sacrificed for their children, they put their children's needs before their own. They made sure their children had every opportunity to succeed, even if it meant going without themselves. But sitting in my kitchen that morning, staring at the rain and feeling like my heart had been hollowed out with a spoon, I began to wonder if I had gotten it all wrong. Maybe what I had thought was love was actually something else. Maybe what I had thought was being a good mother was actually being a mother who didn't know how to let go. Maybe Sophia was right to want distance from me, right to want a wedding day where she didn't have to worry about me taking over, or trying to fix things, or making everything about me. The thought was unbearable, but it was also undeniable. I had been so focused on being needed that I had forgotten to pay attention to whether my help was actually wanted. I had been so busy being the kind of mother I thought I should be, that I had failed to notice that my daughter had grown up and might need a different kind of mother now. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Sandra Martinez, the wedding coordinator at the Abernethy Center. Sandra and I had been in touch regularly over the past 8 months, working out details and making sure everything would be perfect for Sophia's day. She didn't know that Sophia didn't know I was paying for the venue, but she had been wonderful to work with, always patient with my questions and accommodating of my requests. I hesitated before calling her. Once I made this call, there would be no taking it back. Once I canceled the venue, I would be burning a bridge that I wasn't sure I was ready to burn. But as I sat there, thinking about Sophia's casual dismissal of my presence at her wedding, thinking about how easily she had decided that I was more trouble than I was worth, I felt something shift inside me. For 40 years I had been Ruby the mother, Ruby the helper, Ruby the woman who made sure everyone else's needs were met before she even thought about her own. I had been so good at being that person that I had forgotten there might be any other way to be. But maybe it was time to remember that before I was anyone's mother, I was Ruby Coleman, a woman with her own thoughts and feelings and needs. I dialed Sandra's number. "Abernethy Center, this is Sandra," came the cheerful voice on the other end of the line. "Hi Sandra, it's Ruby Coleman," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm calling about the Sophia Coleman-Marcus Rivera wedding on June 15th. "Oh, hi Ruby," Sandra's voice brightened. "I was just reviewing the final headcount numbers. Everything's looking beautiful for the big day. What can I help you with?" I took a deep breath. "I need to cancel the booking." There was a pause. "Cancel?" Sandra's voice was confused. "Is there a problem with the date? We could potentially move things around if there's a scheduling conflict." "No," I said slowly. "There's no scheduling conflict. I just need to cancel the entire booking." "I see," Sandra said, and I could hear her flipping through papers. "I'm so sorry to hear that. May I ask what happened? Is there anything we can do to resolve the issue?" How could I explain that my daughter had decided I was too much trouble to have at her own wedding? How could I tell this lovely woman who had spent months helping me plan every detail that the bride didn't actually want me there? "It's a family matter," I said finally. "The wedding is no longer happening as planned." "I understand," Sandra said gently. "I'm so sorry. I know how much work you've put into making this day special. Let me check our cancellation policy for you. Since we're still about 12 weeks out, you should be able to get most of your deposit back, minus the processing fees." Most of my deposit back. I almost laughed. All those months of planning, all those phone calls and emails and careful coordination, and it came down to processing fees. "That's fine," I said. "Just let me know what I need to do." "I'll email you the cancellation forms," Sandra said. "And Ruby, I really am sorry. I know this must be incredibly difficult." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and felt the weight of what I had just done settle over me. I had canceled my daughter's wedding venue. In a few hours, when Sophia called the venue to discuss some detail or another, she would find out that there was no longer a booking in her name. She would discover that the venue she thought Marcus was paying for had actually been paid for by the mother she had just uninvited from her wedding. Part of me felt sick about it. Part of me wanted to call Sandra back and tell her it was all a mistake, that I would pay whatever fees were necessary to reinstate the booking. But a larger part of me felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, a sense of my own power, my own agency, my own right to make decisions about my own life and my own money. I had spent so many years giving and giving and giving, always with the expectation that my sacrifices would be appreciated, that my efforts would be recognized, that my love would be returned in kind. But love, I was beginning to understand, wasn't supposed to be a transaction. And if Sophia could make unilateral decisions about our relationship, then so could I. The rain had stopped while I was on the phone, and watery sunlight was starting to filter through the clouds. I made myself another cup of coffee and sat down to wait for my phone to ring. It would ring soon enough, once Sophia discovered what I had done. And when it did, I would be ready for a very different kind of conversation than the one we had had that morning. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to be Ruby the accommodating mother, Ruby the understanding parent, Ruby the woman who always put everyone else's needs first. I was going to be Ruby Coleman, a woman who had finally decided that her own feelings mattered too. The phone rang 2 hours later. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, not because I was playing games, but because I needed those few seconds to center myself, to remember who I was choosing to be in this moment. "Hello, Sophia," I said calmly. "What did you do?" Her voice was shaking with anger, and I could hear Marcus in the background asking what was wrong. "The venue just called and said our booking was canceled. They said you canceled it. What the hell did you do?" I took a sip of my coffee and looked out at the clearing sky. "I canceled the venue booking," I said simply. "You what?" She was almost shouting now. "You can't do that. That's our wedding venue. You can't just cancel our wedding." "Actually," I said, and my voice was still calm, still steady, "I can. Because I was the one paying for it." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Sophia finally spoke, her voice was quiet and confused. "What do you mean you were paying for it?" "I mean that for the past 8 months I have been paying for your wedding venue, and the catering, and the flowers, and the photography. I arranged to pay for most of your wedding as a surprise, because I wanted you to have the day you dreamed of without the financial stress." Another long silence. "Mom," she said finally, and her voice was small now, uncertain. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't know," I said. "That was the point. I wanted it to be a gift." "But why would you cancel it?" she asked, and now she sounded like she was crying. "If it was supposed to be a gift, why would you take it away?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my small garden where the spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. "Because you uninvited me from your wedding, Sophia. You decided that having me there would be too much trouble, that I would somehow ruin your day just by being present. And I realized that I don't want to pay for a party that I'm not welcome to attend." "Mom, that's not—" she started, but I interrupted her. "That's exactly what it is," I said firmly. "You made a choice about what kind of relationship you want with me, and I'm making a choice about what kind of relationship I want with you. You can't have it both ways, sweetheart. You can't push me out of your life and still expect me to fund it." I could hear her sobbing now, and Marcus's voice in the background trying to comfort her. Part of me wanted to take it all back, to call Sandra and reinstate the booking, to go back to being the mother who fixed everything and asked for nothing in return. But I didn't. I stayed on the line and I listened to my daughter cry, and I felt something I had never felt before. The strength that comes from finally standing up for yourself. "We can fix this," Sophia said through her tears. "You can call them back. You can tell them it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," I said gently. "And I'm not going to fix this, Sophia. You made a decision about your wedding, and now I've made a decision about my involvement in it. If you want to get married at the Abernethy Center, you and Marcus can call them yourselves and make your own arrangements." "But we can't afford it," she whispered. "Then maybe you need to have a different kind of wedding," I said. "The kind you can actually afford. The kind that fits your actual life instead of the life you want me to subsidize." The words sounded harsh even to me, but they were also true. I had been enabling Sophia to live beyond her means, to make choices without considering the consequences, because I was always there to catch her when she fell. Maybe it was time for her to learn how to catch herself. "I don't understand why you're being so cruel," she said, and the accusation stung. "I'm not being cruel," I said slowly. "I'm being honest. For the first time in a very long time, I'm being completely honest about how I feel and what I want." "What you want," she repeated, and there was an edge to her voice now. "This is supposed to be about what I want. It's my wedding." "Yes," I said, "it is your wedding, and that's exactly why you should be the one paying for it." When we hung up, I felt empty and full at the same time. Empty of all the expectations and resentments I had been carrying around for so long, and full of something new, something that felt like self-respect. I had no idea what would happen next, no idea if Sophia would forgive me, or if this would be the end of our relationship as I knew it. But for the first time in 40 years, I had chosen myself, and that felt like something worth celebrating. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my garden, pulling weeds and deadheading the early daffodils. The physical work felt good, grounding, and I found myself thinking about all the ways I had been tending other people's gardens, while letting my own go to seed. Maybe it was time to change that. Maybe it was time to start cultivating the life I wanted, instead of always cultivating the lives others wanted me to give them. As the sun set behind the Portland hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made myself dinner and sat down to eat it slowly, savoring each bite. I wasn't waiting for anyone else to come home. I wasn't rushing to finish so I could help someone else with their problems. I was just Ruby Coleman, eating dinner and watching the sunset, and that was enough. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of silence. Not the peaceful quiet I had grown accustomed to in my empty house, but the heavy, anticipatory silence that comes before a storm. I went through my normal routines: morning coffee, checking emails, tending to my small herb garden on the back patio, but everything felt different somehow, as if I was seeing my life through new eyes. My phone stayed mercifully quiet. No calls from Sophia, no frantic messages from Marcus, no attempts at reconciliation or negotiation. Part of me had expected an immediate counterattack, a barrage of calls and texts trying to convince me to change my mind. The fact that none came felt somehow worse than if they had. It suggested that maybe Sophia wasn't as devastated by my actions as I had expected. Maybe she was relieved to have an excuse to cut me out of her wedding planning entirely. On Thursday morning, I was reorganizing my spice rack when my sister Carmen called from Phoenix. Carmen was 3 years older than me and had always been the practical one in our family, the one who said exactly what she thought without worrying about hurting feelings. We talked every few weeks, usually about mundane things: her grandchildren's latest achievements, my work with the literacy program at the library, our mother's ongoing complaints about the food at her assisted living facility. "Ruby," Carmen said without preamble when I answered the phone, "what the hell is going on with you and Sophia?" I nearly dropped the jar of oregano I was holding. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb with me," she said in that big sister voice that could still make me feel like I was 12 years old. "Marcus called David last night. David was Carmen's son, Sophia's cousin, and apparently the family member that Marcus felt comfortable enough with to share their drama. I should have seen this coming. In our family, secrets had a way of traveling through the cousin network faster than wildfire. "Marcus called David about what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About how you went crazy and canceled their wedding venue," Carmen said bluntly. "About how you've been secretly paying for their wedding, and now you're holding it hostage because Sophia hurt your feelings. Is that true?" I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, the same chair where I had taken Sophia's call 3 days earlier. "It's more complicated than that." "I'm sure it is," Carmen said, and her voice softened slightly. "But Ruby, honey, what are you doing? This is Sophia's wedding we're talking about. Your only daughter's wedding." There it was, the guilt that I had been expecting, the reminder of my obligations as a mother. "She uninvited me, Carmen. She told me I couldn't come to the ceremony because I would be too much trouble." "Too much trouble how?" I found myself explaining the conversation to Carmen, trying to convey not just what Sophia had said, but how she had said it. The casual dismissal in her voice, the way she had made it sound like excluding me was the most reasonable thing in the world. As I talked, I could hear myself getting defensive, and I hated it. I didn't want to have to justify my feelings to anyone, not even my sister. "Okay," Carmen said when I finished. "That was shitty of her. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. But Ruby, canceling her wedding venue, that's nuclear. That's scorched earth. Are you sure that's really what you want to do?" "I don't know," I admitted, and it was the first time I had allowed myself to feel uncertain about my decision. I just couldn't stand the idea of paying for a party I wasn't welcome at. It felt like she was using me. "Maybe she was," Carmen said. "Or maybe she's just a 28-year-old woman who doesn't know how to navigate having a mother who wants to be involved in everything without stepping on her independence. When's the last time you let Sophia handle something big on her own? The question hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all the times I had stepped in to help Sophia over the years, all the problems I had solved for her, all the obstacles I had cleared from her path. I had told myself I was being a good mother, but when Carmen put it that way, it sounded different. It sounded like I had been treating my adult daughter like a child who couldn't take care of herself. I was trying to help her, I said weakly. I know you were, Carmen said gently, but sometimes helping can look a lot like controlling, even when that's not what you mean. After Carmen hung up, I sat in my kitchen and really thought about Sophia's words for the first time. You know how you get at big events, how you like to take charge of things. I had been so hurt by the rejection that I hadn't really examined whether there might be truth in what she was saying. I thought about Sophia's high school graduation, how I had spent weeks coordinating with other parents to organize a surprise party, how I had taken over the planning so completely that Sophia's best friend's mother had finally pulled me aside and gently suggested that maybe the kids should have some input into their own celebration. I thought about Sophia's college graduation, how I had arrived early to scout out the best spots for photos, how I had directed the whole family through pose after pose until Sophia had finally snapped and asked if we could just take a few normal pictures. I thought about her 25th birthday party, how I had spent hours making decorations and coordinating the guest list and planning the menu, how proud I had been of the beautiful event I had created, and how Sophia had seemed oddly subdued throughout the whole thing. When I asked her later if she had enjoyed her party, she had said yes, but there had been something in her eyes that I had chosen not to examine too closely at the time. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe I did take charge of things. Maybe my desire to make everything perfect for the people I loved had somehow morphed into a need to control their experiences. Maybe what I saw as being helpful, others saw as being overbearing. The realization was uncomfortable, like wearing a sweater that was too tight. I didn't want to see myself as the kind of person who couldn't let others handle their own lives. But the evidence was starting to pile up. How many times had I jumped in to fix things that Sophia hadn't asked me to fix? How many times had I made decisions for her, or at least heavily influenced her decisions, because I thought I knew what was best? But even if all of that was true, even if I had been too controlling, too involved, too much, did that justify the way she had handled this? Did that make it okay for her to uninvite me from her wedding, with no discussion, no attempt to work things out, no acknowledgement of everything I had done for her over the years? I was still wrestling with these questions when my doorbell rang Friday afternoon. I looked through the peephole and saw Sophia standing on my front porch, shifting from foot to foot the way she used to do when she was nervous as a child. She was wearing the blue sundress I had bought her for her birthday last year, and her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked young and uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who had called to uninvite me from her wedding. I opened the door slowly, not sure what to expect. "Hi, Mom," she said, and her voice was small. "Hi, sweetheart," I said automatically, then caught myself. I wasn't sure we were at the sweetheart stage anymore. "Can I come in?" she asked. "I think we need to talk." I stepped aside and let her into the house where she had grown up, where she had spent countless hours doing homework at the kitchen table and watching movies on the living room couch. She looked around as if she was seeing it for the first time, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the books stacked on every available surface, the little touches that made this house mine. "Do you want some coffee?" I asked, falling back on the hostess instincts that had been drilled into me since childhood. "Sure," she said, though she didn't sound like she really wanted any. I busied myself with the coffee maker, grateful for something to do with my hands. Sophia sat down at the kitchen table, in the same chair she had always preferred, the one that faced the window overlooking the backyard. For a moment, it felt like any other visit, like she had just stopped by to catch up and share whatever was happening in her life. "Mom," she said as I handed her a mug, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I sat down across from her, wrapping my hands around my own mug for warmth. "Okay. Were you really paying for the whole wedding? Not just the venue, but everything?" I nodded. "Most of it. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer. I arranged with all the vendors to send the bills to me instead of to you and Marcus. She stared down at her coffee, not drinking it. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted it to be a surprise, I said. I wanted you to be able to have the wedding you dreamed of without worrying about the money. But that's not your responsibility, she said quietly. Marcus and I are adults. We should be paying for our own wedding. I know that, I said. But I wanted to help. I have the money. And it would have made me happy to know that you could have everything you wanted. Without asking me if that's what I wanted, she said, and there was an edge to her voice now. What do you mean? She looked up at me then, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Mom, do you have any idea how it feels to find out that your wedding, the thing you thought you and your fiancé were planning and paying for together, was actually being funded by your mother? Do you know how that makes me feel about myself? I hadn't thought about it that way. I had been so focused on giving her a gift that I hadn't considered how receiving that gift might make her feel. I thought you would be happy. Part of me is happy, she said. Of course, part of me is grateful that you wanted to do something so generous for me. But another part of me feels like you just proved that you don't think Marcus and I are capable of handling our own lives. The words stung because they were eerily similar to what Carmen had said. That's not what I meant. Maybe not, Sophia said, but that's how it feels. It feels like you looked at our budget and our plans and decided they weren't good enough, so you went behind our backs to fix everything. I was trying to help, I said again. But the words sounded weak even to me. I know you were, she said, and her voice was gentler now. But Mom, you're always trying to help. You're always trying to fix things and make them better and smooth out all the rough edges. And sometimes that feels less like love and more like judgment. Judgment? Like you don't trust me to handle my own life, she said. Like you think I need you to swoop in and save me from my own decisions. I wanted to argue with her, to point out all the times my help had actually been helpful, all the crises I had helped her navigate, all the problems I had solved. But as I sat there looking at my daughter's face, I realized that she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been treating her like someone who needed saving, even when she hadn't asked to be saved. Is that why you didn't want me at the ceremony? I asked. Because you thought I would try to take over? She nodded slowly. Marcus and I have been together for 3 years, and in that time, you've planned my birthday parties, helped us find our apartment, co-signed our lease, and now secretly paid for our wedding. Every major event in my life has had your fingerprints all over it. Because I love you, I said. I know you love me, she said, and a tear finally spilled down her cheek. But sometimes your love feels like it comes with strings attached. Like I have to be grateful and dependent and always needing you, or else I'm not being a good daughter. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's not true. Isn't it? She asked. When's the last time you let me struggle with something on my own? When's the last time you let me fail at something without stepping in to fix it? I opened my mouth to answer, but no examples came to mind. Had I really been that controlling? Had I really made it impossible for Sophia to feel independent and capable? The thing is, Sophia continued, I don't think you're trying to control me on purpose. I think you're trying to be needed. And that's almost worse, because it means that my independence threatens you. Her words cut deep, because they contained a truth I hadn't wanted to face. I had built my identity around being the kind of mother who was always there, always helpful, always ready to solve problems. But what happened to that identity when your child no longer needed you to solve their problems? So what do you want from me? I asked, and I couldn't keep the hurt out of my voice. Do you want me to just disappear from your life, to stop caring about what happens to you? No, she said firmly. I want you to trust me. I want you to believe that I'm capable of handling my own life, even if I don't handle it the way you would. I want you to ask me what I need instead of assuming you know what I need. And what do you need now? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where I had taught her to plant seeds when she was 5 years old. I need you to let me figure out my own wedding, she said finally. Whether that means finding a new venue that Marcus and I can actually afford, or postponing until we can save more money, or having a completely different kind of celebration altogether. I need to know that whatever we end up doing, it's something we chose and paid for ourselves. Even if it's not as nice as what I could give you? Especially if it's not as nice, she said. Mom, do you remember when I was learning to ride a bike, and you kept running alongside me holding onto the seat? I nodded. She had been 6, determined to learn but terrified of falling. And do you remember how I kept telling you to let go, but you were afraid I would crash? You did crash, I said. Several times. But I also learned to ride, she said. And I couldn't learn until you actually let go of the bike and let me balance on my own. I understood the metaphor, but understanding it and accepting it were two different things. What if you fall? Then I'll fall, she said simply, and I'll get back up and I'll try again. Just like I did with the bike. We sat in silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I was trying to imagine what it would feel like to step back and let Sophia handle her wedding planning on her own, to resist the urge to offer advice or solutions or financial assistance. It felt unnatural, like trying to breathe underwater. I owe you an apology too, Sophia said suddenly. I looked up at her in surprise. I should have talked to you about feeling overwhelmed by your involvement instead of just cutting you out, she said. That wasn't fair. And it wasn't kind. You didn't deserve to find out you weren't invited to my wedding in a phone call. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. The apology didn't erase the hurt, but it helped. And I should have been honest about feeling uncomfortable with how much you were doing for us, she continued. I let you keep helping because it was easier than having difficult conversations, but that wasn't fair to either of us. Why didn't you say something sooner? I asked. She shrugged. Because I knew you meant well. Because I didn't want to hurt your feelings. Because I was afraid that if I pushed back too hard, you would think I didn't appreciate everything you've done for me over the years. I would never think that, I said. Wouldn't you? She asked gently. Mom, when I told you I wanted to major in education instead of business, you spent 6 months sending me articles about how teachers don't make enough money. When I told you Marcus and I wanted to live together before we got married, you made comments about why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free for about a year. You have strong opinions about my choices, and you're not always great at hiding your disappointment when I don't make the choices you would make. Again, she wasn't entirely wrong. I did have strong opinions about what was best for Sophia, and I hadn't always been as supportive as I could have been when she made decisions I disagreed with. I had told myself I was being protective, but maybe what I was really being was judgmental. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't realize I was doing that. I know you didn't, she said, but it made it really hard for me to be honest with you about things I knew you wouldn't approve of. Like not wanting me at your wedding? Like feeling suffocated by how much you were doing for us, she said. Like wanting to plan my own wedding and pay for it myself, even if that meant having something smaller and simpler than what you could provide. I thought about the wedding I had been planning for her in my head, the elegant reception at the Abernethy Center, the beautiful flowers, the professional photography that would give her perfect memories of her perfect day. It had never occurred to me that Sophia might prefer something different, something more modest but more authentically hers. What kind of wedding do you actually want? I asked. She smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Something small and personal. Maybe in Marcus's parents' backyard, with just our immediate families and closest friends. His mom makes incredible tamales, and we thought we could do a casual Mexican feast instead of a formal dinner. Nothing fancy, just everyone we love eating good food and celebrating with us. It sounded lovely, actually. It sounded like Sophia and Marcus, warm and unpretentious, and focused on the people rather than the production. It also sounded like something they could afford on their teacher salaries, without going into debt or accepting financial help from their parents. That sounds perfect for you, I said, and I was surprised to realize I meant it. Really? She asked, and I could hear the hope in her voice. Really? I said. It sounds like it will be exactly what you want, instead of what someone else thinks you should want. She reached across the table and took my hand. I do want you there, Mom. I want you at the ceremony, and at the reception, and in all the family photos. I just want to know that when you're there, You're there as my mom, not as my event planner. I can do that, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. The urge to help and fix and organize was so deeply ingrained in me that I wasn't sure I could just turn it off. But I could try. And I want to ask you for something, she said. What? I want you to let Marcus and me handle all the wedding planning ourselves. I want you to promise that you won't call vendors or make suggestions or try to pay for things behind our backs. I want this to be something we do on our own. The request made my chest tight with anxiety. What if they forgot something important? What if they didn't research their vendors carefully enough? What if they made mistakes that I could help them avoid? But as I looked at Sophia's face, at the hope and determination in her eyes, I realized that those weren't really my problems to solve. They were hers and Marcus's, and maybe it was time I trusted them to solve them. I promise, I said, even if we make mistakes, even if you make mistakes, even if you could do it better? I took a deep breath. Even if I could do it better. She squeezed my hand. Thank you. After Sophia left that afternoon, I sat in my quiet house and tried to figure out who I was supposed to be now. For so many years, my role had been to anticipate problems and solve them, to smooth Sophia's path and make her life easier. If I wasn't doing that anymore, what was I doing? The question felt enormous and terrifying and also strangely exciting. Maybe this was an opportunity to rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. Maybe this was a chance to develop an identity that wasn't entirely dependent on being needed by someone else. I thought about the things I had enjoyed before Sophia was born, the interests I had set aside when motherhood took over my life. I had loved photography once, had even taken some classes and talked about maybe freelancing as a wedding photographer. I had enjoyed traveling, had dreamed of taking a trip to Scotland to explore the country where my grandmother was born. I had been passionate about literacy advocacy, had volunteered with adult learning programs. Before, Sophia's school activities took up all my free time. Maybe it was time to dust off some of those old dreams. Maybe it was time to remember that Ruby Coleman was more than just Sophia's mother, that I had value and purpose beyond my role as a helper and fixer and facilitator. The thought was both liberating and lonely. I had spent so many years being essential to someone else's life that the idea of being essential only to my own felt strange and uncertain. But maybe that was exactly what I needed to learn how to do. That evening, I called the Literacy Center, where I used to volunteer, and asked if they still needed tutors. The coordinator remembered me and was delighted to hear from me. We made an appointment for the following week to discuss how I might get involved again. Then I pulled out the travel brochures I had been collecting for years, the ones for Scotland tours, that I had always told myself I would take someday, when I had more time, when Sophia was more settled, when there was a better moment. I spread them out on my kitchen table and started reading about Edinburgh and the Highlands, and the small villages where my great-grandmother had grown up. For the first time in a very long time, I was making plans that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or wants or schedules. I was making plans for Ruby Coleman, and that felt like the beginning of something new and important. The process of rebuilding my relationship with Sophia and rediscovering my own identity wouldn't happen overnight. There would be setbacks and misunderstandings and moments when I would have to bite my tongue to keep from offering unwanted advice. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving in the right direction, toward a version of myself and a relationship with my daughter that was based on mutual respect rather than dependency. It wasn't the future I had planned, but maybe it was the future I needed. The weeks that followed my conversation with Sophia felt like learning to walk all over again. Every instinct I had developed over 28 years of motherhood seemed suddenly unreliable. When Sophia called to tell me they had found a new venue, Marcus's aunt's community center in Gresham, my first impulse was to ask if they had checked the acoustics, if they had confirmed the availability of tables and chairs, if they had thought about backup plans in case of rain. Instead, I bit my tongue and said, "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. I'm sure it will be perfect." The words felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I had never learned properly. But Sophia's voice brightened in a way I hadn't heard in months, and she spent 10 minutes telling me about their plans for string lights and potted plants, and a playlist Marcus was putting together instead of hiring a DJ. I listened and made appropriate sounds of enthusiasm, and when she hung up, I felt simultaneously proud of myself and completely unmoored. Who was I if I wasn't the person who anticipated problems and offered solutions? Who was Ruby Coleman when she wasn't being useful? I started finding out the hard way. The first week of May, Sophia called in tears because the florist they had booked had double-booked their date and was trying to back out of their contract. Every fiber of my being wanted to jump in my car and drive to the flower shop, to use my decades of experience dealing with vendors and difficult people to fix the situation. Instead, I listened while Sophia vented her frustration, offered sympathy when she asked for it, and resisted every urge to give advice unless specifically requested. "I just don't know what to do," she said through her tears. "We already sent the invitations, and the wedding is in 6 weeks. How are we supposed to find another florist with such short notice?" "That sounds incredibly stressful," I said, gripping my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles went white. "What options are you considering?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe we could do the flowers ourselves? Marcus's sister is pretty crafty. Or maybe we could just forget about flowers altogether and focus on other decorations." Both options sounded perfectly reasonable to me, though 6 months earlier I would have been on the phone with 3 other florists within the hour, comparing prices and availability and portfolios. "Either of those could be beautiful," I said carefully. "What feels right to you?" "I think we might try doing them ourselves," she said, and I could hear her starting to sound more confident. "It might actually be more personal that way, more us." "I think that sounds lovely," I said. And I meant it. "If you decide you want any help with research or anything, just let me know." "Thanks, Mom," she said, and there was something different in her voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "It means a lot that you're not trying to take over." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I had just completed some sort of emotional triathlon. It had taken every ounce of self-control I possessed not to leap into action, not to start making phone calls and solving problems. But I had done it. I had let my daughter handle her own crisis, and she had handled it. She had come up with creative solutions and made thoughtful decisions, and she had felt good about herself in the process. Maybe Carmen and Sophia had been right. Maybe my help, no matter how well-intentioned, had been robbing Sophia of the opportunity to develop confidence in her own problem-solving abilities. Maybe by always being there to catch her when she fell, I had inadvertently taught her that she wasn't capable of catching herself. The realization was humbling and painful and also oddly liberating. If Sophia didn't need me to manage her life, then I was free to focus on managing my own. I threw myself into rediscovering who I was outside of my role as Sophia's mother with the same intensity I had once brought to organizing her life. I signed up for a photography workshop at the community college, something I had been talking about doing for years but had never found the time for. I contacted the literacy center and started volunteering again, working with adult learners who were trying to earn their GEDs. I even went to a travel agent and booked that trip to Scotland I had been dreaming about, scheduling it for August, 2 months after Sophia's wedding. Each new activity felt like putting on clothes that had been hanging in my closet unworn for decades. They fit, but they felt unfamiliar, like I was playing dress-up as the person I might have been if I had never lost sight of my own interests and ambitions. The photography class was particularly revelatory. I had forgotten how much I loved the technical challenge of manual settings and composition, the meditative process of looking at the world through a viewfinder and trying to capture something beautiful or meaningful. Our instructor, a woman named Janet, who had been photographing weddings and portraits for 30 years, took one look at my work and suggested I consider pursuing it more seriously. "You have a good eye," she said after reviewing my assignment on environmental portraits. "Have you ever thought about doing this professionally?" The question caught me off guard. "Oh, I'm just doing this for fun," I said automatically. "I'm not really the type to start a business at my age." "What type is that?" Janet asked with a raised eyebrow. "The type who has life experience and knows how to work with people, and has the time to really focus on developing a craft?" I hadn't thought about it that way. I had been so conditioned to think of myself as someone whose productive years were behind her, someone who was winding down rather than gearing up. But Janet was right. I was only 62, which meant I potentially had another 20 or even 30 productive years ahead of me. Why shouldn't some of those years be devoted to pursuing something I was passionate about? That evening, I called my friend Patricia, who had been encouraging me to be more adventurous for years. Patricia was a few years older than me, a retired teacher who had reinvented herself as a successful real estate agent after her divorce. If anyone would understand the challenge of starting over at this stage of life, it was her. "I'm thinking about starting a photography business," I told her without preamble when she answered the phone. "It's about damn time," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "What finally convinced you?" I told her about the photography class, about Janet's encouragement, about the strange new freedom I was feeling to consider possibilities I had never allowed myself to explore. "I just wonder if I'm being realistic," I finished. "I mean, the market is probably saturated with photographers, and I'm starting so late." "Ruby," Patricia said firmly, "you're not starting late. You're starting when you're ready. And the market isn't saturated with photographers who have your life experience and your way with people. Trust me, there are plenty of 20-somethings with expensive cameras and no idea how to make a nervous bride feel comfortable or how to capture the real emotion in a family portrait." She had a point. I thought about all the weddings I had attended over the years, all the family gatherings where I had ended up being the unofficial photographer, because I was the one who noticed when someone needed a touch-up, who could coax genuine smiles out of reluctant subjects, who understood that the best photos often happened in the quiet moments between poses. What would I even photograph, I asked. I mean, everyone wants to shoot weddings, but after everything that's happened with Sophia, who says you have to shoot weddings? Patricia interrupted. What about family portraits? Senior portraits? Corporate headshots? There are lots of ways to make money with photography that don't involve dealing with bridezillas and their mothers. The mention of mothers made me wince, but Patricia was right. I could focus on the kinds of photography that played to my strengths, working with families, capturing authentic moments, helping people feel comfortable in front of the camera. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long," Patricia warned. "You're not getting any younger, and neither are the rest of us. If you're going to do this, do it." That night, I lay in bed thinking about what it would mean to have a career again, to have something that was mine alone, something that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother or daughter or helper. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. I was still mulling it over the next morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Mrs. Coleman?" The voice was young and nervous. "This is Jessica Martinez. I'm Sandra Martinez's daughter." It took me a moment to place the name. Sandra Martinez was the wedding coordinator at the Abernethy Center, the woman I had worked with for months and then abruptly canceled on when I found out about Sophia's wedding plans. "Oh, hello, Jessica," I said carefully. "How can I help you?" "Well," Jessica said, and I could hear her take a deep breath. "My mom told me about your situation with your daughter's wedding, and I know it probably sounds crazy, but I was wondering if you might be interested in a job." "A job?" The word hung in the air between us like a question mark. "What kind of job?" I asked. "My mom is starting her own event planning business," Jessica explained. "She's been working for the Abernethy Center for 15 years, but she wants to go out on her own. The thing is, she needs someone to help her, someone who understands the client side of things, someone who knows what it's like to be the mother of the bride, or the person paying for the wedding." I was quiet for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. "Your mother wants to hire me as a wedding planner?" "Not exactly," Jessica said quickly. "More like a client liaison. Someone who can work with families to understand what they really want and need. Someone who can translate between what people think they want and what will actually make them happy on their special day." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, trying to learn how to step back from managing other people's events, and someone was offering me a job managing other people's events professionally. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that," I said. "Are you kidding?" Jessica laughed. My mom says you were the most organized and thoughtful client she's ever worked with. She said you thought of details that most people never even consider, and you were amazing at communicating what you wanted. Plus, you have the perspective of being both a mother and someone who's planned major events. But I don't have any professional experience in event planning. Neither did my mom when she started, Jessica said. Look, I know this might seem like it's coming out of nowhere, but would you be willing to meet with her? Just to talk about it. She's really excited about the possibility of working with someone who understands the emotional side of event planning, not just the logistics. I found myself saying yes before I had fully thought it through. We arranged to meet the following week at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, and after I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like the universe was playing some kind of elaborate joke on me. Just as I was learning to step back from organizing other people's lives, someone wanted to pay me to organize other people's lives. Just as I was discovering my own interests and pursuing my own goals, an opportunity was presenting itself that would involve me once again in weddings and family dynamics and all the complicated emotions that came with major life events. But maybe that wasn't a contradiction. Maybe the difference was that this time, I would be approaching it as a professional with boundaries and expertise, not as a mother who couldn't help herself from taking over. Maybe there was a way to use my natural inclinations and hard-won experience in a way that was healthy and sustainable. The meeting with Sandra the following Tuesday was unlike any job interview I had ever experienced. We met at a small cafe near Pioneer Square, and Sandra arrived with a portfolio of photos from events she had coordinated, and a business plan that was clearly the result of months of careful thought and preparation. I've been thinking about going out on my own for years, she told me over coffee and scones. But I kept running into the same problem. I'm good at the logistics. I can coordinate vendors and manage timelines and solve problems when things go wrong. But I'm not always great at the emotional stuff, at understanding what families really need versus what they think they need. What do you mean? I asked. Sandra pulled out a photo of an elaborate wedding reception. All crystal chandeliers and cascading flowers and perfectly coordinated linens. This bride spent $40,000 on her reception because she thought that's what would make her happy. But you know what she told me afterward? That her favorite part of the whole day was the 10 minutes she and her new husband snuck away from the reception to eat pizza in the hotel room because they were starving and hadn't had a chance to eat any of the fancy food they had paid for. I laughed despite myself. I could picture it perfectly. The exhausted couple, still in their wedding clothes, sharing greasy pizza, and finally having a moment to actually connect with each other instead of performing for their guests. The thing is, Sandra continued, I think the bride would have been just as happy with a smaller, simpler celebration if someone had helped her figure out what actually mattered to her instead of just giving her what she thought she was supposed to want. And you think I could be that someone? I think you could be someone who helps families have those conversations, Sandra said. Someone who asks the right questions and listens to the answers and helps people figure out how to have celebrations that actually reflect their values and priorities. The idea was appealing in a way I hadn't expected. I thought about all the conversations I had had with other mothers over the years, all the wedding planning stress I had witnessed, all the families who had spent fortunes on events that seemed to make everyone miserable. What if there was a way to help people avoid those pitfalls? What if there was a way to use my experience and intuition to help families create celebrations that actually brought them joy? What would the job actually involve? I asked. Initial consultations with families, Sandra explained, helping them clarify their vision and priorities, mediating when family members have different ideas about what the event should look like, serving as a liaison between families and vendors to make sure everyone's expectations are aligned. So basically being a translator between what people say they want and what they actually want. Exactly, Sandra said. And helping them figure out how to allocate their budget in ways that will actually make them happy, instead of just checking boxes they think they're supposed to check. The more we talked, the more interested I became. This felt like a way to channel my organizational skills and people instincts in a direction that could actually be helpful instead of intrusive. Instead of imposing my vision on other people's events, I would be helping them discover and articulate their own visions. I have to ask, I said finally, are you sure you want to work with someone who just canceled her own daughter's wedding venue? Sandra smiled. That's actually part of why I want to work with you. You understand what it feels like to be on the other side of this industry, to be the person who's emotionally invested and financially responsible, but not necessarily in control. And you had the courage to make a difficult decision when your boundaries were being crossed. Those are exactly the kinds of experiences that would make you good at this job. We talked for another hour about logistics and expectations, and the possibility of me starting part-time while I figured out if this was something I really wanted to pursue. By the time we parted ways, I felt like I was looking at a completely unexpected path forward, one that could allow me to use my skills and experience in a way that was both professionally satisfying and personally sustainable. That evening, I called Sophia to tell her about the job offer. I wasn't asking for her permission or her advice, just sharing something significant that was happening in my life the way adult family members do with each other. "Mom, that sounds amazing," she said, and I could hear genuine excitement in her voice. "You would be so good at that. You always know exactly what needs to be done and how to make people feel comfortable." "You think so?" I asked. "It wouldn't be weird for me to be working in the wedding industry after everything that's happened?" "I think it would be perfect," she said firmly. "You love organizing events, and you're really good with people. The only problem before was that you were trying to do it for free for people who didn't necessarily want your help. This way, you'd be doing it for people who are specifically asking for your help and paying you for your expertise." The distinction was important, and I was grateful that Sophia had articulated it so clearly. There was a world of difference between imposing my help on family members who hadn't asked for it and offering my services to clients who had specifically sought me out. "Are you going to take it?" Sophia asked. "I think I am," I said. "I think I'm ready to try something new." "Good for you, Mom," she said, and there was a warmth in her voice that reminded me of the relationship we used to have before things got so complicated. "I'm proud of you for putting yourself out there." After we hung up, I sat in my living room and thought about how much my life had changed in just a few months. 6 months earlier, I had been Ruby the mother, Ruby the helper, Ruby the woman who lived her life in service to other people's needs and dreams. Now I was becoming Ruby the photographer, Ruby the event planning consultant, Ruby the woman who was finally building a life that was authentically her own. The transition wasn't always smooth. There were days when I felt lost without the familiar rhythms of anticipating and solving other people's problems. There were moments when I had to consciously stop myself from offering unsolicited advice or jumping in to fix things that weren't my responsibility to fix. But there were also days when I felt more like myself than I had in years, when I remembered what it felt like to have my own goals and interests and sources of satisfaction. The job with Sandra felt like a bridge between the person I had been and the person I was becoming. It would allow me to use the skills I had developed over decades of caring for my family, but in a professional context with clear boundaries and mutual respect. It would give me a way to channel my natural inclination to help and organize into work that was both meaningful and financially rewarding. Most importantly, it would be mine. Not something I was doing because someone else needed me to do it, but something I was choosing because it aligned with my interests and abilities and values. For the first time in my adult life, I was making a career decision based on what I wanted rather than what other people expected from me. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. I was 62 years old, and I was finally learning how to live for myself. It had taken my daughter uninviting me from her wedding for me to understand that my value as a person wasn't dependent on how much I could do for other people. It had taken losing my role as the mother who fixed everything for me to discover that I had other roles I could play, other ways I could contribute to the world. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She looked confident, purposeful, excited about the future. She looked like someone who knew her own worth, someone who had finally learned the difference between being helpful and being essential. She looked like Ruby Coleman, and for the first time in a very long time, I was proud to be her. The morning of Sophia's wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June day that Portland rarely delivers. But that makes you remember why you fell in love with the Pacific Northwest in the first place. I woke up early not from nerves or anxiety, but from excitement. For the first time in months, I was looking forward to my daughter's wedding day without any complicated feelings about my role in it. I had spent the previous evening preparing my camera equipment, not as the mother of the bride trying to document every moment, but as a professional photographer who had been hired to capture candid moments at the reception. It was Sophia's idea, actually. 3 weeks earlier, she had called to ask if I would be interested in photographing the informal gathering after the ceremony, not because they couldn't afford to hire someone else, but because they wanted those memories to be captured by someone who loved them. The request had touched me more than I expected. It represented a level of trust that felt different from the old dynamic of me inserting myself into her events. This time, I had been specifically asked to participate in a way that utilized my new skills while respecting the boundaries we had established. I dressed carefully in the navy blue dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, something elegant but not attention-grabbing, something that would photograph well but wouldn't compete with the bride. As I applied my makeup, I thought about how different this morning felt from how I had imagined it would feel 6 months earlier. Then, I had pictured myself as the mother of the bride in the traditional sense, orchestrating details and managing logistics and making sure everything was perfect. Now, I was simply Ruby Coleman, proud mother and professional photographer, looking forward to celebrating my daughter's happiness. The ceremony was being held at a small community center in Gresham, about 20 minutes from my house. Marcus's family had transformed the space with string lights and potted plants, exactly as Sophia had described to me weeks earlier. When I arrived, I could see immediately that it was going to be beautiful in a way that was completely authentic to who Sophia and Marcus were as a couple. I found a seat in the 3rd row, close enough to see everything, but far enough back that I wouldn't feel tempted to start directing anyone's attention to details they might have missed. Carmen had driven up from Phoenix for the weekend and was sitting with me, along with my ex-husband David and his wife Margaret. It felt strange but also right to be part of the family section, to be included but not central, to be there as Sophia's mother, rather than as the person responsible for making everything happen. When the music started and Marcus took his place at the front of the room, I felt my eyes fill with tears. He looked handsome and nervous and completely besotted, exactly the way a groom should look. His family was beaming from the front row, and I could see his mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Then the doors opened and Sophia appeared, walking slowly down the aisle on her father's arm. She was wearing a simple white dress that she had found at a vintage shop in Hawthorne, paired with her grandmother's pearl earrings and a bouquet of flowers that she and Marcus's sister had arranged themselves the night before. She looked radiant, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was exactly what she wanted. I watched my daughter walk toward her future husband, and I felt a kind of peace settle over me that I hadn't experienced in years. This was her day, her choice, her life. I was honored to witness it, but I wasn't responsible for orchestrating it. The distinction made all the difference. The ceremony itself was short and personal, with vows that Sophia and Marcus had written themselves and readings from Marcus's niece and Sophia's college roommate. There were no professional musicians, just a playlist that Marcus had put together of songs that were meaningful to them as a couple. There were no elaborate floral arrangements, just the simple bouquets and a few potted plants that would later be given to family members as gifts. It was intimate and heartfelt and completely free of the kind of stress and drama that I had witnessed at so many other weddings over the years. As I watched Sophia and Marcus exchange rings, I realized that this wedding was probably more beautiful and meaningful than anything I could have planned for them, precisely because it reflected their personalities and values, rather than some external idea of what a wedding should be. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. I found myself crying, not from sadness or regret, but from pure joy at seeing my daughter so happy. This was what I had wanted for her all along, though it had taken me a while to understand that what I wanted for her and what she wanted for herself might not be the same thing. After the ceremony, everyone moved to Marcus's parents' backyard for the reception. It was exactly as Sophia had described it to me weeks earlier. Casual and warm and focused on good food and good company rather than elaborate decorations or entertainment. Marcus's mother had indeed made tamales, along with several other traditional Mexican dishes, and the tables were laden with food that people had brought to share. I spent the first hour simply enjoying myself as a guest, talking with family members I hadn't seen in a while, and meeting Marcus's extended family for the first time. It was liberating to be able to focus on the people and the conversation, without feeling like I needed to be monitoring the logistics or solving problems that might arise. When it was time for me to start taking photographs, I approached the task differently than I would have 6 months earlier. Instead of trying to capture every moment and orchestrate perfect poses, I focused on documenting the authentic interactions and genuine emotions. I photographed Sophia laughing with her college friends, Marcus dancing with his grandmother, children from both families playing together in the backyard. The photos I took that day were some of the best work I had ever done, not because they were technically perfect, but because they captured real joy and genuine connection. When I showed them to Sophia and Marcus a week later, they were thrilled with how natural and spontaneous everything looked. "These are exactly what we wanted," Sophia said as she scrolled through the images on my laptop. "They look like us, like our actual wedding instead of some magazine version of a wedding." The comment meant more to me than any compliment about my technical skills could have. I had learned to see through my daughter's eyes instead of imposing my own vision, and the result was something that was authentically theirs. As the reception wound down that evening, I found myself sitting at a table with Carmen and a few other family members, watching Sophia and Marcus clean up with the help of their friends. There was something beautiful about seeing them work together to dismantle the celebration they had created, folding chairs and collecting decorations and saying goodbye to guests. It felt like a metaphor for marriage itself, the ability to work as a team to handle both the celebrations and the cleanup. "You did good, Ruby," Carmen said quietly, following my gaze. "I know this wasn't easy for you, stepping back and letting them handle everything themselves." "It was harder than I expected," I admitted, "but also easier in some ways. I didn't have to worry about whether everything was perfect, because it wasn't my responsibility to make it perfect." "And look how it turned out," Carmen said. "They're happy, the wedding was beautiful, and you got to actually enjoy it instead of spending the whole time stressed about details." She was right. This wedding had been more enjoyable for me than many of the events I had spent months planning and coordinating. There was something to be said for being a participant rather than a producer, for being able to focus on the meaning of the occasion rather than the mechanics of making it happen. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning in March when Sophia had called to uninvite me from her wedding. At the time, it had felt like the end of the world, like a rejection of everything I had done as a mother. Now I could see that it had actually been the beginning of something new and better, a relationship with my daughter based on mutual respect rather than dependency, and a sense of myself as a person with my own interests and abilities and value. The following Monday, I started my new job with Sandra's event planning company. We had decided to call it Celebrations by Design, with the tagline, "Helping families create meaningful moments." My role was exactly what Sandra had described, working with clients to understand their vision and priorities, mediating family discussions about what events should look like, and helping people allocate their resources in ways that would actually bring them joy. My first client was a woman named Jennifer, whose daughter was getting married in the fall. Jennifer had called us because she was feeling overwhelmed by all the decisions and conflicting advice she was getting from various family members about what the wedding should include. "I just want my daughter to have a beautiful day," Jennifer told me during our initial consultation. "But everyone has opinions about what that should look like, and I don't know how to make everyone happy." The conversation felt familiar in a way that was both comfortable and slightly unsettling. 6 months earlier, I might have been sitting in Jennifer's position, trying to manage everyone's expectations while losing sight of what actually mattered. Now I was in a position to help her navigate those same challenges. "Tell me about your daughter," I said. "What makes her happy? What are her priorities for this day?" As Jennifer talked about her daughter's personality and preferences, I helped her think through which wedding traditions and expectations aligned with those priorities, and which ones might be worth questioning or modifying. We talked about the difference between what looked impressive and what felt meaningful, between what other people expected and what would actually create the kind of memories her daughter wanted to have. By the end of our conversation, Jennifer had a much clearer sense of what she wanted to focus on and what she was comfortable letting go of. She left our meeting with a plan that felt manageable and authentic, rather than overwhelming and performative. "Thank you," she said as she gathered her purse and notes. "I feel like I can breathe again. You helped me remember that this is supposed to be about celebrating my daughter, not impressing other people. Working with Jennifer and the other clients who followed felt like using my natural inclinations in a way that was both helpful and sustainable. I was still organizing and problem-solving and helping families navigate complex emotional dynamics, but I was doing it as a professional with clear boundaries rather than as a mother who couldn't help herself from taking over. The work was satisfying in a way that surprised me. Each family I worked with taught me something new about the different ways people expressed love and celebrated milestones. I learned to ask better questions and listen more carefully to the answers. I developed strategies for helping families have difficult conversations about money and expectations and competing visions. Most importantly, I learned to separate my own emotions and experiences from those of my clients. When a mother called in tears because her son wanted a destination wedding that would exclude half the family, I could offer support and guidance without projecting my own feelings about being excluded from family events. When a father complained about the cost of his daughter's dream wedding, I could help him think through his priorities without getting triggered by memories of my own financial sacrifices. The professional distance was healthy in a way that my previous approach to helping people had never been. I could be empathetic and supportive without losing myself in other people's problems. 3 months into the job, Sandra and I were already getting referrals and positive reviews from satisfied clients. We were developing a reputation for helping families create celebrations that actually reflected their values and relationships, rather than just checking off expected boxes. "I think we're onto something here," Sandra said one afternoon as we reviewed our calendar for the upcoming months. "We're booked solid through the holidays, and I'm getting calls from vendors who want to work with us because they say our clients are always clear about what they want and realistic about their budgets." The success felt different from anything I had accomplished before. It wasn't just personal satisfaction from helping people, it was professional recognition for expertise I had developed and services I was providing. I was building something that was mine, something that existed independently of my relationships with family members. In August, I took the trip to Scotland that I had been planning since the spring. It was my first solo vacation in decades. 2 weeks of exploring Edinburgh and the Highlands, and the small villages where my great-grandmother had grown up. I rented a car and drove through the countryside, stopping whenever something caught my eye, taking photographs of landscapes and architecture and local people who were willing to pose for a stranger with a camera. The trip was revelatory in ways I hadn't expected, not just because Scotland was beautiful, though it was, but because of how it felt to be completely responsible for my own experience. I could change my plans on a whim, spend an entire afternoon in a single museum if it interested me, or skip the tourist attractions entirely if I preferred to sit in a pub and talk with locals. I found myself thinking about Sophia often during the trip, but not with the old anxiety about whether she was managing her life properly without my help. Instead, I thought about how proud I was of the woman she had become, how much I admired her courage in setting boundaries that had ultimately been good for both of us. I sent her postcards from various towns I visited, not long detailed letters but simple notes about things I thought she would find interesting. She responded with texts and photos from her own life, pictures of the apartment she and Marcus had been gradually decorating, updates about her students, stories about weekend adventures they were taking together. Our communication had settled into a rhythm that felt natural and sustainable. We talked regularly but not constantly, shared our lives with each other without feeling obligated to manage each other's experiences. I could ask about her work and her marriage without feeling like I needed to offer solutions to every challenge she mentioned. She could tell me about her plans and decisions without worrying that I would try to take over or impose my own ideas. The relationship we were building felt more like a friendship between two adults who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, rather than the intense, sometimes suffocating dynamic of mother and dependent child that had characterized our relationship for so many years. When I returned from Scotland in late August, I felt like I was coming home to a life that was authentically mine rather than a life I had constructed around other people's needs. My house felt peaceful rather than empty, my calendar felt full rather than chaotic, and my work felt meaningful rather than compulsive. I had started dating again, something I hadn't done seriously since my divorce 15 years earlier. I met Robert through the photography class and we had been seeing each other casually for a few months. He was a retired engineer who had discovered a passion for landscape photography, and we enjoyed taking photo walks together and discussing composition and lighting techniques. Robert was kind and interesting, and had his own well-established life, which meant he wasn't looking for someone to take care of him or manage his affairs. Our relationship was based on mutual enjoyment rather than mutual need, which felt like a revelation after decades of relationships that had been primarily about caregiving and responsibility. "You seem different than when I first met you," he told me one evening, as we walked through the Japanese garden, cameras slung over our shoulders. "More relaxed. More yourself." "I think I am more myself," I said, considering his observation. "I spent so many years being who other people needed me to be that I had forgotten who I actually was." "And who are you?" he asked with a smile. The question might have stumped me 6 months earlier, but now I had an answer. "I'm someone who likes solving problems and helping people, but on my own terms. I'm someone who's good with a camera and enjoys traveling and values both solitude and good company. I'm someone who's still figuring things out at 62 and is excited about what comes next." It felt good to be able to describe myself in terms of my own qualities and interests, rather than in terms of my relationships to other people. I was still Sophia's mother, but I was also Ruby Coleman, photographer and event consultant and independent woman. In September, Sophia called to tell me that she and Marcus were thinking about buying a house. It was a conversation that 6 months earlier would have sent me into a frenzy of research and advice giving, and offers to help with down payments or real estate agents or home inspections. Instead, I listened with interest and asked questions that helped her think through her own priorities and concerns. "We're looking at this little bungalow in southeast Portland," she told me. "It needs some work, but it has good bones and a great backyard for a garden." "That sounds exciting," I said. "What's your timeline?" "We're hoping to make an offer next week if the inspection goes well," she said. "It's scary, you know, such a big decision. But it feels right." "Big decisions usually are scary," I agreed, "but it sounds like you and Marcus are approaching it thoughtfully." "We are," she said, and I could hear the confidence in her voice. "We've done our research and talked to a financial advisor and looked at a bunch of different options. I feel good about our process." The old Ruby would have immediately offered to help with research or to contribute to the down payment or to connect them with real estate professionals I knew. The new Ruby simply said, "I'm proud of you for taking such a big step. I hope the inspection goes well." "Thanks, Mom," Sophia said. "I'll let you know how it goes." After we hung up, I realized that our conversation had been exactly the kind of exchange I had always hoped to have with my adult daughter. Supportive without being intrusive, interested without being controlling, available without being pushy. It was the kind of relationship that was only possible when both people felt secure in their own identities and capabilities. By October, Celebrations by Design was thriving beyond Sandra's and my most optimistic projections. We had helped plan dozens of events, from intimate family dinners to elaborate anniversary parties, and our client satisfaction ratings were consistently high. More importantly, I was finding genuine fulfillment in work that allowed me to use my organizational skills and emotional intelligence in service of other people's joy. I had also started getting referrals for family portrait sessions, which allowed me to combine my photography skills with my ability to help people feel comfortable and natural in front of the camera. There was something deeply satisfying about capturing authentic moments of connection between family members, about helping people see themselves the way their loved ones saw them. One afternoon in late October, I was editing photos from a recent family session when Sophia called with news that I had been hoping to hear for weeks. "We got the house," she said, and I could hear her grinning through the phone. "The sellers accepted our offer, and we close in 3 weeks." "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," I said, and I meant it completely. "I'm so excited for you." "I can't believe we're going to be homeowners," she said. "It still feels surreal." "You should be proud of yourselves," I said. "Buying your first house is a huge accomplishment." "We want to have a housewarming party once we get settled," she said. "Nothing fancy, just friends and family over for dinner. Would you like to come?" The invitation felt like a gift, not because it was unexpected, but because it represented the kind of relationship we had built. One where I was included because my presence was genuinely desired, not because obligation or guilt demanded it. "I would love to come," I said. "Just let me know when and I'll be there." Great, she said. And Mom, thank you. For what? For letting me figure this out on my own, she said. For trusting me to handle it. I know it probably wasn't easy for you to step back, but it meant a lot to me to know that you believed I could do it. The gratitude in her voice was worth more than any thanks I had ever received for solving problems or managing crises. This was appreciation for something much more difficult and much more important: the gift of trust, the gift of space, the gift of allowing someone you love to become who they're meant to be. You're welcome, I said simply. I'm proud of the woman you've become. As we talked about her plans for the new house and her excitement about having a garden and a workshop space for Marcus, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction with how our relationship had evolved. We were still close, but our closeness was based on choice rather than need, on mutual respect rather than dependence. That evening, as I sat in my own living room, editing photos and planning my schedule for the following week, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in the 8 months since Sophia's original wedding call. I had gone from being a woman whose identity was entirely wrapped up in being needed by others, to being someone who had her own career, her own interests, her own source of fulfillment and self-worth. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of loneliness and uncertainty, times when I had to resist the urge to fall back into old patterns of giving advice and solving problems that weren't mine to solve. But there had also been moments of exhilaration and discovery, times when I had surprised myself with my own capabilities and resilience. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of the year, the woman who had been secretly funding her daughter's wedding while being excluded from the ceremony itself. That woman had been generous but not wise, loving but not discerning. She had given too much of herself to people who hadn't asked for her gifts, and in doing so, she had robbed both herself and them of the opportunity to develop authentic, sustainable relationships. The woman I was now still wanted to help and support the people she loved, but she had learned to do so in ways that respected boundaries and encouraged independence. She had discovered that the most loving thing you can do for someone is sometimes to step back and let them figure things out for themselves, even if they make mistakes in the process. Most importantly, she had learned that her own needs and desires mattered, that she deserved to have a life that was about more than just serving others. She had rediscovered interests and passions that had been dormant for years, and she had found ways to pursue them that were both personally fulfilling and professionally rewarding. As I turned off my computer and got ready for bed, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't experienced in years. I was looking forward to tomorrow, to the photography session I had scheduled with a young family, to the consultation with a new event planning client, to dinner with Robert at a restaurant we had been wanting to try. I was looking forward to my life, my actual life, not the life I was living in service to someone else's needs and dreams. It had taken me 62 years to learn the difference, but I had finally figured it out, and it felt like the beginning of the best chapter yet. The phone rang one more time that evening, just as I was turning off the lights. It was Sophia, calling with one final piece of news. "I forgot to tell you earlier," she said. "Marcus and I were talking about the wedding photos you took, and we realized we never properly thanked you for them. They're honestly some of our most treasured possessions." "I'm so glad you love them," I said. "It was an honor to capture your day." "Actually," she said, "we were wondering if you might be interested in photographing Marcus's sister's engagement party next month. She saw our wedding photos and specifically asked if we could recommend you." The request caught me off guard. Not just because it represented potential new business, but because it showed that Sophia was proud enough of my work to recommend me to other family members. It was validation of my new professional identity in a way that felt both surprising and deeply satisfying. "I'd be happy to talk with her about it," I said. "Have her give me a call." "I will," Sophia said. "Mom, I'm really proud of you, you know. For starting your own business, for pursuing photography, for everything you've accomplished this year." The words filled my heart in a way that surprised me. For so many years, I had been the one expressing pride in Sophia's accomplishments. To have her express pride in mine felt like the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "That means more to me than you know." After we hung up, I stood in my darkened kitchen for a moment, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. 8 months earlier, I had been a woman who had lost her sense of purpose when her daughter no longer needed her constant care and attention. Tonight, I was a woman with a thriving business, a growing reputation as a photographer, a healthy romantic relationship, and most importantly, a daughter who respected and admired the person I had become. The journey from one woman to the other had been painful and uncertain at times, but it had also been the most important work I had ever done. I had learned to value myself not just for what I could do for others, but for who I was as an individual. I had discovered that love didn't require sacrifice of the self, but rather the courage to be authentically yourself in relationship with others. As I made my way upstairs to bed, I felt grateful for that difficult phone call in March, for Sophia's courage in setting boundaries that had ultimately freed us both, and for my own decision to cancel that wedding venue. It had been the first step in a journey that had led me back to myself, and forward into a future that was entirely my own creation. Ruby Coleman, at 62, was finally just getting started. The winter months that followed brought a different kind of rhythm to my life, one that I was still learning to appreciate. December in Portland meant rain and gray skies, but also the cozy intimacy of staying indoors with a good book and a cup of tea, without feeling guilty about not being productive or useful to someone else. Celebrations by design had slowed down considerably after the busy fall wedding season, which gave me time to focus on my photography business and to take on some personal projects that I had been putting off. I had started working on a photo series documenting the stories of other women who had reinvented themselves later in life, and I was discovering that my experience was far from unique. There was Margaret, a 70-year-old retired nurse, who had started a small catering business specializing in comfort foods after her husband passed away. There was Linda, a 65-year-old former teacher who had opened an art studio where she taught pottery classes to adults. There was Carol, a 58-year-old divorced mother, who had gone back to school to become a social worker after her youngest child left for college. Each woman I interviewed and photographed had a story about losing herself in the service of others, and then finding herself again when circumstances forced her to reevaluate her priorities. Each had discovered strengths and interests she had forgotten she possessed. Each had learned that it was never too late to become the person she was meant to be. The project was deeply personal for me, but it was also becoming something larger. I was thinking about putting together an exhibition, or maybe even a book, something that could inspire other women who might be struggling with similar transitions. Robert was endlessly supportive of the project, often suggesting women I should interview or offering to help with the technical aspects of organizing the photographs. His encouragement meant a lot to me, partly because it was freely given without any expectation that I should reciprocate by managing his life or solving his problems. Our relationship had continued to evolve in ways that surprised me. We had been seeing each other for almost 8 months, and while we spent several nights a week together, we had maintained our separate homes and independent lives. It was a kind of partnership I had never experienced before, one based on genuine companionship rather than mutual dependence. "You know," he said one evening as we walked through the Pearl District after dinner at a new restaurant, "I never thought I would enjoy being with someone who had such a full life of her own." "What do you mean?" I asked, adjusting my scarf against the December wind. "My ex-wife was very focused on our family," he explained. "Which was wonderful when the kids were young, but after they left home, she didn't really know what to do with herself. She kept trying to make me the center of her world, and it felt like a lot of pressure." I understood what he meant. I had been that woman for many years, the one who had built her entire identity around caring for others, and then felt lost when that role was no longer needed. "I like that you have your own work, your own interests, your own goals," Robert continued. "I like that when we're together it's because we choose to be, not because either of us needs the other to feel complete." His words resonated with me because they described exactly the kind of relationship I was learning to value. For too many years, I had confused love with need, thinking that the depth of a relationship was measured by how much each person sacrificed for the other. Now I was discovering that the healthiest relationships were often the ones where both people were whole and fulfilled on their own, choosing to share their lives because doing so brought joy rather than obligation. Christmas that year was different from any I had experienced in decades. Instead of spending weeks planning elaborate meals and coordinating family schedules and buying gifts for people who didn't really need anything, I focused on simple, meaningful gestures that felt authentic rather than performative. Sophia and Marcus invited me to join them for Christmas dinner at their new house, along with Marcus's parents and his sister's family. It was a casual affair, with everyone contributing something to the meal, and the children playing with their new toys while the adults lingered over coffee and conversation. I brought a photo album I had made for Sophia and Marcus, featuring not just pictures from their wedding but also candid shots I had taken over the years of them together. There were photos from their early dating days, from family gatherings, from quiet moments I had captured when they didn't know I was watching. The album told the story of their relationship in a way that formal wedding photos never could, and they were both moved to tears as they flipped through the pages. "This is incredible, Mom," Sophia said, holding up a picture of her and Marcus laughing together at a barbecue 2 summers earlier. "I remember this day, but I had no idea you captured this moment." "That's what I love about photography," I said. "Sometimes the most beautiful moments are the ones that happen when people aren't posing, when they're just being themselves." The gift felt right in a way that my previous Christmas presents never had. Instead of giving them something expensive that I thought they should want, I had given them something personal that reflected who they actually were. It was a small thing, but it represented a larger shift in how I approached relationships. Marcus's mother, Elena, was a warm and gracious woman who had welcomed me into their family with genuine kindness. As we cleaned up after dinner, she pulled me aside to thank me for the photographs I had taken at the wedding. "You captured something special that day," she said in her slightly accented English. "Not just the ceremony, but the feeling of it. When I look at those pictures, I can remember exactly how happy everyone was." "That means a lot to me," I said. I wanted to document the real celebration, not just the formal moments. "You have a gift," Elena said. "Marcus told me you're starting a business doing this professionally?" I nodded, feeling a familiar surge of pride when I talked about my work. "I've been doing event photography and family portraits. It's been wonderful to discover something I'm passionate about." "Good for you," Elena said with approval. "It's never too late to find your calling." Her words stayed with me as I drove home that evening. It's never too late to find your calling. I had spent so many years thinking that my productive years were behind me, that women my age were supposed to be winding down rather than gearing up. But Elena was right. I was finding my calling at 62, and there was nothing late about it. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, exactly when I was supposed to be there. January brought a new challenge and opportunity. Sandra called me the first week of the new year with an unusual request. "I just got off the phone with a potential client," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "She's planning a 50th wedding anniversary party for her parents, and it's going to be huge. 300 guests, multiple events over a weekend. The works." "That sounds like a big undertaking," I said, already feeling a familiar flutter of excitement at the prospect of a complex logistical challenge. "It is," Sandra agreed, "but here's the thing. The daughter planning it, Patricia Hendricks, specifically asked for you. She said she heard about you from Jennifer Martinez, and she wants someone who understands the emotional dynamics of family events, not just the logistics." I was flattered, but also a little apprehensive. A 300-person anniversary celebration would be the largest event I had worked on since starting with Celebrations by Design. It would require all of my organizational skills and then some. "What's the timeline?" I asked. "The party is in May," Sandra said. "So we have about 4 months to plan everything. Are you interested?" I thought about it for a moment. 4 months earlier, I might have been intimidated by such a large undertaking. But I had gained confidence over the past year, both in my professional abilities and in my understanding of what I could and couldn't control. I knew I could handle the planning aspects of the event, and I had learned not to take responsibility for managing the emotional dynamics that were beyond my influence. "Let's set up a meeting," I said. Patricia Hendricks turned out to be a woman about my own age, who was struggling with many of the same issues I had faced with Sophia's wedding. She wanted to create a beautiful celebration for her parents, but she was feeling overwhelmed by the competing expectations of various family members and uncertain about how to balance her own vision with her parents' preferences. "My mother keeps saying she doesn't want to fuss," Patricia told me during our initial consultation, "but I know she would be disappointed if we didn't do something special. And my father says he just wants to see his family together, but my brothers have very different ideas about what the celebration should look like." The situation felt familiar, but this time I was approaching it as a professional consultant rather than as a family member with my own emotional investment in the outcome. I could offer Patricia guidance and support without feeling like I had to solve all of her family's communication problems. "Let's start with your parents," I suggested. "What would make them happiest? Not what you think they should want, but what would actually bring them joy on their special day." As we talked through Patricia's parents' personalities and preferences, a picture began to emerge of a couple who valued family connection above elaborate displays. They were people who would be more impressed by thoughtful touches than expensive ones, who would rather have meaningful conversations than formal entertainment. "It sounds like they would appreciate a celebration that feels more like a family reunion than a formal party," I said. "Something that gives them a chance to really connect with people they don't see very often." Patricia's face lit up. "Yes, exactly. That's what I was thinking. But I wasn't sure how to make that happen with such a large group." Over the following weeks, we developed a plan that honored Patricia's parents' values, while still creating a memorable celebration. Instead of one large formal dinner, we organized a weekend of smaller, more intimate gatherings, a casual Friday evening reception for out-of-town guests, a Saturday afternoon family picnic with activities for all ages, and a Sunday brunch that would allow for lingering conversations and family storytelling. Working on the anniversary celebration reminded me why I had been drawn to event planning in the first place. There was something deeply satisfying about helping families create meaningful experiences together, about using my organizational skills to facilitate genuine connection rather than just impressive displays. The project also gave me a chance to work on my photography skills in a different context. Patricia hired me to document the weekend's events, which meant I would be both planning the celebration and capturing it. It was a challenge that excited me, requiring me to think about how to create moments that would be both meaningful to experience and beautiful to photograph. As winter gave way to spring, my life settled into a rhythm that felt both stable and dynamic. I had regular clients for both event planning and photography, which provided steady income and professional satisfaction. I had a relationship with Robert that continued to evolve in healthy directions, based on mutual respect and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. Most importantly, I had a relationship with Sophia that felt more authentic and sustainable than anything we had shared when she was younger. Sophia had started calling me regularly just to chat, not because she needed anything but because she enjoyed talking with me. Our conversations ranged from light topics like books we were reading and restaurants we wanted to try, to deeper discussions about work challenges and life decisions. I had learned to listen without immediately offering solutions, and she had learned to share her thoughts without worrying that I would try to take over her life. In March, almost exactly a year after the original wedding phone call that had changed everything, Sophia called with news that took me completely by surprise. "Mom," she said, and I could hear something different in her voice, an excitement mixed with nervousness that I hadn't heard since she had called to tell me about her engagement. "I have something to tell you." "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, setting down the photo prints I had been reviewing. "Marcus and I are pregnant," she said, and I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. "We're going to have a baby." The news hit me like a wave of pure joy. I had been hoping that Sophia and Marcus would decide to start a family, but I had been careful not to ask or hint or pressure them in any way. Learning that they had made this decision on their own timeline felt like a gift. "Oh, Sophia," I said, and I realized I was crying. "That's the most wonderful news. How are you feeling?" "Scared and excited and nauseated," she said with a laugh. "All at the same time. We're still early. Only about 8 weeks, but we wanted to tell you before we tell everyone else." The fact that I was among the first to know felt significant, a sign of the trust and closeness that had developed between us over the past year. A year earlier, I might have immediately started offering advice about doctors and prenatal vitamins and nursery planning. Instead, I simply told her how happy I was for them, and asked how she was feeling about becoming a mother. It's surreal, she admitted. I keep looking at Marcus and thinking, we're going to be parents. It doesn't feel real yet. That's completely normal, I said. It takes time for something that big to sink in. I keep thinking about what kind of mother I want to be, she said quietly. And what kind of grandmother I want our baby to have. The comment was loaded with meaning, and I understood what she was really saying. She was thinking about the patterns we had established in our own relationship, about what she wanted to repeat, and what she wanted to do differently. You're going to be a wonderful mother, I said. And I'm going to try to be the kind of grandmother who supports you without interfering, who helps when asked but doesn't assume I know what's best. I know you will, she said, and there was confidence in her voice that warmed my heart. I'm actually excited about the idea of you being a grandmother. I think you'll be really good at it. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about what it would mean to become a grandmother. A year earlier, the prospect might have filled me with anxiety about how to be helpful without being intrusive, how to be involved without taking over. Now I felt excited about the opportunity to love and support a grandchild, while respecting Sophia and Marcus's role as parents. I thought about the kind of grandmother I wanted to be, present but not pushy, helpful but not controlling, loving but not overwhelming. I wanted to be someone my grandchild could turn to for comfort and wisdom, but I also wanted to make sure that Sophia never felt like I was undermining her authority or questioning her decisions as a mother. The prospect of having a grandchild also made me think about my own legacy, about what I wanted to pass down to the next generation. I hoped I could share my love of photography with my grandchild, maybe teach them to see the world through a camera lens the way I had learned to do. I hoped I could model the importance of having your own interests and goals, of being a complete person rather than just someone who existed in service to others. Most of all, I hoped I could demonstrate the kind of love that encouraged independence rather than dependence, that celebrated growth rather than trying to control it. The anniversary celebration in May turned out to be one of the most successful events I had ever planned. Patricia's parents were genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the weekend, and the various family members who had initially disagreed about the approach all found ways to enjoy themselves. The casual structure allowed for the kind of organic interactions that made the celebration feel authentic rather than staged. I photographed the entire weekend, capturing not just the formal moments but also the spontaneous interactions that told the real story of this family's love for each other. There were pictures of grandchildren learning card games from their grandfather, of Patricia's mother dancing with her sons, of cousins who hadn't seen each other in years reconnecting over shared memories. When I showed Patricia the photographs a week later, she was thrilled with how they had turned out. "These are perfect," she said, scrolling through the images on my laptop. "They capture exactly what the weekend felt like, not just what it looked like." The success of the anniversary celebration led to several new bookings, and I realized that I was developing a reputation for a particular kind of event planning. Celebrations that prioritized authentic connection over impressive displays, that honored families' actual values rather than external expectations. It was work that felt meaningful, in a way that my previous helping had never quite achieved. I was still using my natural inclination to care for others and create beautiful experiences, but I was doing it in a professional context that respected everyone's boundaries and autonomy. Summer brought new opportunities and challenges. Robert and I decided to take a photography trip together to the Oregon coast, something we had been talking about for months. It was our first extended trip as a couple, and I was curious to see how we would navigate the experience of being together constantly for a week. The trip was a revelation, not because it was perfect, but because it demonstrated how much I had learned about maintaining my own identity within a relationship. We had moments of disagreement about itineraries and different preferences for how to spend our time, but instead of automatically deferring to his wishes or trying to manage his experience, I was able to express my own needs clearly and negotiate compromises that worked for both of us. One morning, Robert wanted to get up early to photograph the sunrise at Cannon Rock, while I preferred to sleep in and explore the tide pools later in the day. A year earlier, I might have either gone along with his plan despite my own preferences, or tried to convince him that my idea was better. Instead, we simply agreed to split up for the morning and meet for lunch, each pursuing our own interests and then coming back together to share what we had discovered. The arrangement worked perfectly. Robert got some beautiful sunrise shots, and I had a peaceful morning exploring the tide pools and photographing the intricate details of sea anemones and starfish. When we met for lunch, we were both energized by our separate adventures and excited to share our experiences with each other. "I like that we can do our own things and still enjoy being together," Robert said as we sat on the restaurant deck overlooking the ocean. "It feels like a much healthier way to travel than trying to do everything as a unit." I agreed completely. The trip reinforced my understanding that the best relationships were partnerships between two whole people, not attempts to merge into one identity that somehow satisfied both parties' needs. When we returned to Portland, I felt more confident than ever about the life I was building. I had work that fulfilled me, a relationship that energized rather than drained me, and a family connection that was based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Sophia's pregnancy was progressing well, and she had started including me in her planning process in small but meaningful ways. She asked for my opinion on baby furniture, shared ultrasound photos with excitement rather than obligation, and even requested some maternity portraits when she reached her 7th month. The photo session was one of my favorites I had ever done. Sophia was glowing with the particular beauty that comes with pregnancy, and Marcus was so obviously thrilled about becoming a father that his joy was infectious. I captured them in their new home, in the garden they had been cultivating together, in quiet moments of anticipation and connection. When I showed them the finished photos, Sophia started crying. "These are exactly how I want to remember this time," she said, holding up a picture of her and Marcus with their hands on her belly, both of them laughing at something he had just whispered to her. "You've captured how happy we are." "That's all I ever want to do with my photography," I said. "Capture the real feelings, the authentic moments." As autumn approached and Sophia's due date drew closer, I found myself thinking about what it would mean to become a grandmother. I was excited about meeting my grandchild, but I was also conscious of wanting to respect Sophia and Marcus's role as parents from the very beginning. I had seen too many families struggle with boundary issues around new babies, with grandparents who meant well but couldn't resist offering unsolicited advice or trying to take over caring responsibilities. I was determined not to repeat those patterns, no matter how strong my impulse to help might be. Sophia seemed to understand and appreciate my approach. One evening in late September, she called just to talk about her fears and excitement about becoming a mother. "I'm scared I won't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "Everyone acts like motherhood comes naturally, but what if it doesn't for me?" "No one knows what they're doing at first," I assured her. "It's all learning as you go, and you figure it out together with your baby." "Will you help me if I need help?" she asked. "But like real help, not taking over?" The question touched my heart, because it showed how much our relationship had evolved. She trusted me enough to ask for support, but she also trusted herself enough to set boundaries around what kind of support she wanted. "Of course I'll help," I said. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it. But only when you ask, and only in the ways that feel helpful to you." "Thank you," she said. "That's exactly what I was hoping you would say." As I hung up the phone that night, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction with the woman I had become and the relationships I had built. I was no longer the person who needed to be needed in order to feel valuable. I was someone who could offer genuine help when asked, who could step back when appropriate, and who had found fulfillment in her own accomplishments and interests. The journey from the woman who had canceled her daughter's wedding venue in a moment of hurt and frustration to the woman who was preparing to become a supportive grandmother had been longer and more challenging than I could have imagined. But it had also been the most important work I had ever done, the work of discovering who Ruby Coleman really was when she wasn't trying to be who everyone else needed her to be. As October painted the Portland trees in brilliant reds and golds, I looked forward to whatever came next with a sense of excitement and confidence that would have been impossible a year and a half earlier. I was finally living my own life, and it was more beautiful than I had ever dared to imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.